Hey, what's up, everybody? Jason Brown here, stock market coach and option trader. And in this episode of the Money Markets and Mindset podcast, I wanted to sit down and really talk about what's going on in the world today, from racism to riots. I want to go back. How did we end up here? I want to touch on white privilege, my experience with racism or just being brought up being black, and a whole lot more. So if you're tuning in for the normal stock market or financial education content, this topic is going to be a little bit different today, but I still hope you stick around and get a lesson and learn something. If that's not for you, that's okay. That's what we're going to talk about anyway, and then feel free to exit. But again, I hope that you stick around and just vibe with me, dialogue with me. So let's get into it. When you talk about what's going on current day, George Floyd was recently, killed during the whole police interaction with the officer having his knee on his neck. And if you haven't watched the video, it's kind of gruesome to see, the guy, saying he can't breathe, and the cop just with his knee on his neck, just kind of chilling with his hands in his pocket, like, oh, just another day. And then when they finally get off of him, you see his body's just limp. It's almost like he probably died right there on the scene, live on someone's camera, cell phone, who took the video footage, right? So it's very gruesome to watch. But when you think about the footage and what happened, I think for the first time in a long time is that it was almost undeniable what happened. Some of the other cases that happen, person gets shot or whatnot, you don't see the full footage. You don't know what they were doing before then. And I think what it does is it gives people an excuse, no matter what their race. I think it gives them an excuse to turn a blind eye and say, well, we don't really know fully what happened. We didn't see the tape, etc. But in this one, you saw full-fledged with your own eyes what happened. And I think that's a part of why so many people, black, white, all races, are outraged in what's happening. So let's rewind and let's go back and talk about how we got here, because the world isn't upset just because of this one incident, and the black community isn't upset just because of this one incident, but the black community is upset primarily because this keeps happening. This keeps happening. So I want to go back and talk about slavery for a minute, because I don't know if many people think about it this way, but I know it's very impactful for me when I think about it this way. And so, sometimes you hear people say, the Jews, were oppressed and, they're doing fine now, or, how come black people are still going through this? The way I like to think of it, or I shouldn't say I don't like to think of it at all, but when I think about it, I think about the fact that black people, or African Americans, how we self-identify, brown skin, we are the only people who the world, and particularly white America, keeps coming up with new ways to oppress. And so when you go all the way back and you think about slavery and why, black people, African Americans don't vibe with the government, don't vibe with quote unquote the system, is because since we've known the system has always been against us. So think about it. The government back in the day allowed slavery to be legal, which means a black person was allowed to be the property of a white person, and that was law of the land. That was part of legal guidelines for a person of white color to own a person of black color. Now that sounds ridiculous when you hear it today, but you got to think, to us, we go back, we were owned. Maybe it wasn't me personally, our my grandma or great grand ancestors, they were owned. They were pieces of property. Well, then you say, okay, well, the blacks were eventually freed. But then when we were freed, were we really free? I believe the number was 3/5 a man. So if you look back in history, black people were considered 3/5 of a man. We weren't even considered a whole man once we were free, quote unquote free. 3/5 a man, which means first they didn't want us to vote, but if we did vote, our vote would only count as 3/5 because we're not a whole human being. Okay, so you got to think that was legal. Then it was legal for us to have to sit in the back of a bus. It was legal for us to have to, drink from separate water fountains. Okay. So it's like you're free, but you're 3/5 a man. Not only are you 3/5 a man, because we have to do this, we still want to keep you separate from our white kids, our white women, our white schools. And so you guys can go to school over there. You guys can drink from different water fountains. And if you disobeyed such a ludicrous law, who was there to quote unquote keep you in line or beat on you or hang you or do anything unethical to you? It was a white police officer, right? So we got this long history of just clashing with the police. And then, so you're slaves, you're considered property, you're finally free, but you're not really a whole human being. You're 3/5. And you can't drink or go to the same schools as us or ride the same buses. And if you do, you got to sit in the back of the bus. Okay, we eventually get through that and we're allowed, which is funny, allowed to buy property. And again, I'm just trying to enlighten you on like why you may think that this movement, why is this movement so strong and why is it so important to be a part of it, no matter what color or side, or race you identify with. As you look at it over history, think about when we finally got free, 3/5 a man. Now we can finally vote, but it only counts as 3/5 a vote. And we kind of get through all this stuff. Then we're not even allowed to own property. Okay, we're not allowed to own properties. First, we were property. Then we weren't even allowed to own property once we got free. Then, once again, our good old government made it legal it was legal to they call it redlining or red zoning, which means they made it legal to disapprove giving loans to Black people. It made it legal to make sure they only got approved for housing in a certain area. They kind of pushed us all to quote unquote the ghetto. That's what, where the term comes from, right? They pushed Black people into this borough, this ghetto, and said, okay, if we have to allow them to own houses, then they can only live in houses over there. Okay. And if they try to come across the street or cross this line and buy a house, we won't approve them for a loan. And that's legal. That is legal to do, or not today. But again, our good old government, that was legal to do. And so you can see how we don't really have a good track record with the system, the government, police, or other people doing what's in our best interest for that matter, right? And so it's not until we start to bear arms and you think about Black Panthers and different things like that who stood up that we quote unquote start to get some respect, right? But then there's Martin Luther King, there's Malcolm X. I'm not here to go into all of those movements because, man, this would be a whole docu-series or podcast series. But I'm just trying to shed some light on our history with white people, with police, and with the government has not necessarily been positive, and the rules have not necessarily been in our favor. And that's not something you can disagree with. It's just a 100% fact. And so it always baffled me when people of different colors or white color think like, what's the problem or what's the big idea, or that's only one or two people that got killed or shot by the police. It's like, no, this has been happening for years upon years. The system has been against us, and we keep coming up with new ways. So we get past that, and let's just fast forward, right? So we have the George Floyd thing that happens today, but you go back a month or so, you got the Breonna Taylor incident. If you're not familiar with that, police just spray about 26 bullets into this apartment because they had a warrant to search the apartment. It was a no-knock drug warrant, and she was just sleep on the couch. And it wasn't that she was doing or selling drugs, but a guy she dated at some point was possibly involved with drugs, and so they wanted to search her apartment. And so they just sprayed 26 bullets into the place. They knock in the middle of the night, 12:30, according to, it's going through the court right now, right? But the whole theory is that they never announced who they were. Can you imagine someone kicking your door in the middle of the night, not announcing who they are? You would think they're a burglar or something. And so that's one sort. But if you go back even further, right, you had Rodney King on tape. You had Malice Green on tape. You got these guys on tape just getting beat on in the middle of the street while white officers just take their turns hitting them with billy clubs and kicking them in the head. And so I'm just trying to build this timeline to show you that like we do not have a good track record with the police doing what's in the best favor for a black person, white America doing what's in the best interest of a black person, from way back to not so recently to recently. And so you can see why there's this there's this tension between the races and between, Black Lives Matter. And, some people say, well, all lives matter. And I love this saying that's going around. It's like saying all lives matter. It's like telling the fire department when your neighbor's house is on fire and they come down the street to put out his fire. It's like you running outside and saying, hey, spray some water on my house too, because all of these houses on this street matters. And it's like, yes, your house matters, but your house is not on fire. And when I heard that, it just really resonated with me. It's like, yeah, of course your house matters, but your house is not on fire. Your house isn't burning down. And that's what's happening today in the world. It's like, of course all lives matter, but all lives are not getting choked out with a knee on their neck in the middle of the street. All lives are not getting denied the ability to buy housing where they want. All lives were not physical property of another race for years upon years. All lives weren't considered at some point 3/5 a man. Does that make sense? And so when you think about it like that, yes, all lives matters, but the one that's under attack, the one that's on fire is the black life, the black and African American community. Again, however a person chooses to self-identify, those with brown skin that look different from those with white skin. And so it's just, I'm sharing this to just shed some light. And I really think this is why the movement is going from, doesn't matter if you're racist, people want to know if you're anti-racist. And I think the movement has gone to, it's not enough to be neutral. You have to pick a side. And when I say pick a side, meaning you're not racist, but are you anti-racist? Meaning I'm not racist. And I'm just telling from my black ears or my black voice, I'm not racist just says it's not my problem, or I'm not the one out there doing anything against people. So, I mean, I won't do anything to oppress people, but I also won't do anything to stop it. That's what I think. I think that's what I'm just sharing with you my thoughts. I haven't interviewed every black person or every Black Lives Matter leader, but I believe that's what that means to them and to us, is that I won't do anything to oppress people, but I also won't do anything to stop it. Unless they come down my street rioting, then I have a problem with it, right? If it affects my money or my household. And so I think it's to the point where people have turned a blind eye for years and nothing's really changed, right? Nothing's really changed. There's just new creative ways and different things brought up to somehow hold black people to a different standard or give them different resources. So I want to talk about a little bit about my story, just being black, being, brought up in Detroit. We had the riots right here in Detroit. We had huge riots right here in Detroit. And the reality is Detroit never really recovered from the riots. All right. There's still neighborhoods that are burned down, boarded up, that businesses never moved back into. So I definitely don't condone rioting or looting or anything like that. It's an interesting thing to discuss when you think about peaceful protests and when you think about Colin Kaepernick and players wanting to take a knee to, protest racism. And we as America had a big problem with that. How dare you do that? Number one, during a football game. And number two, not during the national anthem or when we're supposed to be honoring the flag. However, you wonder if those same people would get upset if that same flag was the same flag that made one color of people property to another color of people. That same flag is the flag that denied one group of people the right to buy houses in a certain area. That same flag is the flag that made us 3/5 a man. Yet, maybe it's easier not to get upset about what happened years ago. So, well, that's not happening during our time. But he's kneeling during my time. But it's very interesting how we can get upset about that, but then try to deny that peaceful protest, right? And I'm sure there's going to be great debates about that. Maybe we'll lose some followers or subscribers from talking about this, but that's okay. I mean, those probably weren't our people anyway. And we're not here to choose right or wrong. It's just what I want to do is open your mind up to think about, why are certain people so willing to speak out against kneeling at a football game, but some of those same people, I bet if you interviewed or asked them now, what do you think about the current stuff that's going on in the Black community and this movement? I'd be interested to see how many of those, whether they're white Americans or whatever, speak up against police brutality, against the racial injustice and killings in the Black community. But I bet you they're very vocal about kneeling during a football game. How dare you? So just very interesting. So living here in Detroit, I think, before I go back to me living in Detroit, I think what I'm trying to share there is they say peacefully protest, but not during a football game and not during the anthem. They say peacefully protest, but you can't do it past 8 o'clock. Or if the president needs to get in front of this building for a photo opportunity, protest over. Everybody needs to get out of the way because that's what's really important. Right. And so what kind of message does that send when America says peacefully protest? Then America also says, but you can't do it during football. You can't do it during Pledge Allegiance to the flag. And I'm not anti-American or anything like that. I can understand to some extent why that would bother some people. But you try to peacefully protest in the streets, then you get hit with tear gas or the police just shove you, push you, beat you until you go home. So it's like, how are you telling us to go home, yet we have a right to protest? And being here in Michigan, we just had, if you can Google the videos where primarily white people stormed our state capitol with guns, assault rifles, and they demanded that the governor open up Michigan because we're closed during the pandemic. They stormed the state house or Senate house or state house, whatever, the capitol with guns. And it's like, no, they have the right to come in here with guns and protest, and they have the right to freedom of speech. But then a Black Lives Matter movement takes to the streets. They're not hurting anybody. And I'm not comparing this to the rioters and looters because there's opportunists that sneak in and try to kind of turn everything upside down, right? But I'm talking about the peaceful protesters. But it's like, oh no, they can only do it before 8 o'clock. Oh, and they can't do it during football games or during the national anthem. Oh, and if the president needs to be in front of here to take a picture, they can't do it then either, right? So it's very ironic that we're yelling peacefully protest, yet there are so many roadblocks to trying to do it peacefully, which I find is very interesting. The other thing, just living here in Detroit and in Michigan is, I think about growing up being Black myself. We live just south of 8 Mile, right? So if you're familiar with the rapper Eminem, he probably made 8 Mile famous because that was literally, if you're not from Detroit, what 8 Mile typically represented, big picture, was the divide between Black and white people. That's really was the unspoken word of what 8 Mile was. South of 8 Mile is where the Black community lived. North of 8 Mile, 9, 10, 11, 12, primarily the white community. And so I know even myself, just growing up in Detroit, you were nervous to go across 8 Mile. And if you went across 8 Mile, you had to tell someone you were going, when you went, what time you went. Because if you didn't come back, they were worried that, you could be locked up for no reason. You could be killed or taken by white people. And that's literally not that long ago. I'm clearly not an old man, but that's what we went through growing up. I remember being in a car, and if we had just like a baseball cap or something on, when we crossed 8 Mile, everyone in the car had to take off their hat and everybody had to sit up straight for no reason at all. We had insurance, we had license, registration, legal car, but it was just understood. Take your hat off, sit up straight, turn the music down. Even if it's not loud, turn the music off, put 2 hands on the steering wheel. Don't even look left. Just get to your destination so we could hopefully get back across 8 Mile, get back south of 8 Mile, quote unquote, where we belong. where we feel safe, where we feel like we wouldn't be racially discriminated against. And being from Michigan, if you don't know, we had the great Berry Gordy who founded Motown Music. And there was a story about Motown that really resonated with me because it was about Berry Gordy being a businessman. And if you're not familiar with the Isley Brothers, it's a group of guys, Black guys, African American, that, sing some of the great songs, right? Most people are probably familiar with Ronald Isley. He was like one of the lead singers, but the Isley Brothers, your parents probably know about it, right? And so if you come to Michigan, or specifically Detroit, you can actually tour the Motown Museum, which is the original house that a lot of the hits and songs that we know and love today that are either resampled or that were part of our parents' day, a lot of those songs came out of those houses that Berry Gordy bought and then turned into music studios. And so if you ever go through that tour, there's one story that really sticks out. And that was back in the day, Black artists, or let me say record companies, could only get so much playtime on the radio. So one of the things Berry Gordy did was he had to create multiple record companies so that he could play more of his songs, because if you were a Black-owned record company, you could only get maybe 30 minutes of airtime. Well, if he has more than 3 or 4 artists, there's no way you can squeeze all their songs in 30 minutes, right? Throughout the whole day, that's it. And so he would have to create multiple record companies to get around that limitation. Another thing that I found that was very interesting was the Isley Brothers, in order for them to feel comfortable selling records, they actually hired, or at least Berry Gordy, thinking outside the box, he said, everyone loves this music, but if the white people find out that they're Black, they won't buy it. And so this is a true story. You can probably Google the album cover. The Isley Brothers album cover, they actually hired white male models to pose for the album cover. In fact, on the tour, one lady said, there was an older lady, she said, I never knew that the Isley Brothers were Black, because she only saw the album cover with the white men on it. And that's because Berry Gordy had the foresight to say, unfortunately, the music's good, but people won't see the music. They'll only see their Blackness. So why do I bring that up? Being from Detroit, being from Michigan, I think about my own business. And, I know somebody needs to hear this. When I first started my business, the Brown Report, Power Trades University, if you go back and look at some of my old YouTube videos, my very first YouTube videos, you'll notice that I only shared the screen. Like when I was talking about stocks, I only shared the screen or my logo. I never shared my face. I never put my face on my company website. Never put my logo on it. And I think a part of me thought like Berry Gordy, and sadly thought, would anybody buy from me because I'm Black? Would the white dollars recognize that even though I'm Black, I know what I'm talking about? Or would they be tainted from the information because of the color of my skin? Now, I eventually got over that. My face is all over these YouTube videos. My voice is all over the podcast, and my face is all over my website. But when we think about like white privilege, I wonder how many white people think about starting a business today and wonder if they should put their face on the cover or not because of the color of their skin, right? And so those are some of the things that we as Black people have to think about. If we're going to go across 8 Mile, what time are we going? Who are we going to tell that we're going? Make sure we take our hat off. Make sure we sit up straight. If we're going to start a business, do we create some type of alias, some type of neutral name? Are we allowed to put our face on it and show the world that it's a Black business? Those are some of the things that go through Black people's head. If you look up some of the comedians, like Jamie Foxx, for example, Jamie Foxx is not Jamie Foxx's real name. But back in the day, some of the comedians couldn't even get a gig if they knew that they were Black. And so they would come up with alias names to book their gigs under. And by the time that they showed up, once they found out that they were Black, it was too late because they had no chance to back out. They had to fill that spot. But I'm just bringing some of those things up because that's when we talk about white privilege. Those are some of the things that a white person would probably never, ever think about having to do. Take their hat off, sit up straight, change their name to get a job, wonder if they should put their face on the cover of their own business. It's just something that they would never have to think about. And those are some of the things that we as Black people mean when we say that's white privilege. Those are things that just don't even cross your mind. And as I think about financial literacy, I think it's just so important that we as people, whether you're Black, white, whatever, it's so important to understand money and how to manage your money, because that is my way of giving back. That's my way of fighting this whole injustice system, because it's very hard to do when you don't have money. It's so tough to stand out against racism or your boss or something that's not right when your boss may be white or your boss might be sexist, whatever the case may be. But for now, we're just talking about racism. But it's so hard to stand out and speak out against this stuff, no matter if you're Black or white, when you have a fear of getting fired. You have a fear that that person can pull the strings and control whether you can feed your family or not, whether you can take care of your kids or not. And so there's this certain power of speaking out that comes with knowing that financially you and your family are going to be okay. Knowing that financially, regardless of the consequence of you speaking out for what's right, by the way, and let me add at this point, there will never be a bad or wrong time to speak out against injustice, to speak out against racism, to speak out against inhumanity, right? There's never a bad time, but there are bad consequences from bad actors who may be in position of power. And so getting your money right is so important in this day and age, because once you have financial freedom, you do have the freedom to speak out. You do have the ability to, if you're wrong, hire a lawyer to fight on your behalf. You do have the money to post bond in case you're arrested unjustly. All of that stuff takes money, right? Maybe you want to support a cause with money. Maybe you can't be out there, on the front line demonstrating, but maybe you can send the financial resources to those who did take off work, to those who may feel the repercussions of being out there on the front line. But it starts with having the money to do so, having the financial resources to do so, and having the ability to generate income and money no matter what someone else thinks or whatever carrot or whatever noose they try to hang over your head as payback or as revenge for you speaking out. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate and just really recharged, renewed, and recommitted to cranking out podcasts, cranking out YouTube videos, and just talking about financial literacy as well, because that's another area that Black people just haven't had the same opportunities, right? I think about JP Morgan Chase, I think about Fidelity, I think about all of these more, I don't know if popular, more mainstream white investment banks or investors. And I think, how many Black investors would be at their level had we been allowed to buy property back then and participate in the increase in value in property? How many of us would be at that level had we had the opportunity to become stockbrokers back then? Had we had the opportunity to buy stock? Had we had the opportunity to get paid the same wages as, white America was able to get paid? And so we can't change the past, obviously, but we definitely can change what we do from today moving forward, which is why I'm so passionate about getting this information out to you, so passionate about talking about money, credit cards, the stock market, because that's one place where I can sit behind my computer and print money, and it doesn't matter the color of my skin. As long as I have the knowledge and the information, I can do well for myself, for my family, and put myself in a financial freedom type situation where I can speak up, where I can impact change, where I don't have to worry about where our next meal is coming from, as long as I'm able to provide independently by using the resources of the stock market and using the information that I have. So what can I say? This is what's going on during our time, and I would be remiss if I didn't sit down and talk about it. I'd be remiss if I look back on this time and my kid said, what were you doing when all of this was going on? Did you speak out about it? Did you share your thoughts, your ideas? And I said, nope. I just stuck my head down, kept working, trying to make money, and I just let them deal with it and just hoped everything was okay. And so I hope this episode has been insightful, impactful for you. Black, white, Chinese, Asian, Mexican, Hispanic, whatever you self-identify yourself with. I think this is just a call to action for everybody to open up their eyes and ask, in what way can I help? Whether that's speaking up at that private barbecue or picnic in your backyard when someone says something racial or racist about what's going on, whether that's you're a teenager, a high school kid or college kid, and your friend cracks that racial joke and one of you has to muster up the courage to say, hey, that's not funny. I just hope this changes and impacts someone, some way, somehow. And I really can't wait to see, hopefully, where we're at, 50 to 100 years from now, and see the difference that those of us who band together and stood up and said something, I can't wait to see the difference that we make for the next generation. I'll see you on the next episode.